I'm Cassie Strzeb with Music for Your Inbox, and today I'm going to invite Matt LeVeque to join us to chat about the art that's out this month called Cloverleaf Interchanges. Matt was our video and music artist, and I'm just going to invite him right now. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Cassie, how are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm so happy to be able to talk about your piece because it's been an internet secret for so long, and now here we are live on the internet.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, well, we first got the call, we put out the open call, which we just launched for this year again, and you pitched us this really cool idea that we loved, where you're incorporating an audio sort of drone of sorts, along with this really kind of meditative visual idea of having a long shot of just driving, which is I just came back from a road trip to Canada, so I was thinking about your piece a lot.
Oh yeah.
But just kind of how that it can kind of be soothed by all those road sounds and the sounds of commuting in a way, and your particular piece was inspired by your own kind of driving around, I think it was connecting with your partner originally, I think, if I remember correctly, who now happily lives with you, so you don't have to drive so far just to see him.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I knew of your work as a composer and a performer, and so this was really neat for me as a kind of curator to see where you were headed with your video work. So I guess if we could just start off by talking a little bit about sort of because you were talking about how this piece is inspired by a poem that Justin wrote, and if you could talk a bit about how you made that kind of connection to create this visual piece, because I know there's a lot of visuals in your compositions, but this is a video piece. So yeah, I'm just curious how you got from the music only to incorporating the visuals.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, I want to credit Richard On for encouraging me to submit to that call. What was almost a year ago at this point, right?
Yeah.
So thank you, Richard. This piece, it's interesting because I've done works with video before, but I've never shot video myself. And I usually don't really have a creative brain that thinks in terms of images and visuals or things like that. I'm just not really wired that way. But I think when I read Justin's poem, which is called Cloverleaf Interchanges, the same as the film, I was just really inspired by the opening line. So the poem starts with the line, in California, a boy measures his queerness in cloverleaf interchanges. And I just thought that was really beautiful and interesting and kind of insightful in the way that it sort of described, like you said, when we first got together, we kind of had to interface with, the freeway systems in order to just see each other, right? In order to access our relationship. Because at the time I was still living in San Diego where I grew up, and he was living in Lake Elsinore, which is in the middle of the Inland Empire. So it wasn't a long drive. It was maybe an hour and a half or something, but we still had to kind of commute and traverse this region of Southern California to see each other at all. So in a way, those drives that we took to each other kind of became imbued with this sort of queer relationality, life force or something. I don't know quite how to explain it, but I feel we tend to think of commuting as only functional and kind of liminal in a certain way, but the reality is we spend, especially those of us that live here in LA and the surrounding area, we spend so much of our time in these huge kind of this blood web of transit, and we spend so much time in the car because of that, and therefore so much of what we are looking at all the time is just the view of our dash windshield and freeways and roads and things like that. So I think I just became really obsessed with this image of the road from the car. And I thought that there was something there, because like you said, there is this kind of nice, lulling, sort of hypnotic quality to driving a long time. And there's also, on the other side, I think there's a kind of sinister element too of like, like the whole highway hypnosis thing. And you can drive like long distances and commuting to work in the morning, and you get to work and you park your car and you realize like, how did I get here? You just like no recollection of like
Yeah.
no memories formed, things like that. So it like puts you in this weird kind of interesting, sometimes really beautiful, sometimes really kind of creepy, contemplative inner state. So all of those things were kind of on my mind while I was making this, and I was inspired by a few other things too. I really am inspired a lot by the filmmaker James Benning.
Yeah.
Just like really, really kind of long static shots of environments or places. But he has this one film from I think 1975 or somewhere in the mid 70s called The United States of America, where he and his I think partner at the time drove from New York all the way to California. And he just set up the camera in the backseat of his car. So we just see this over-the-shoulder kind of shot of them driving through the entire country, basically. And we get these, like, snapshots of kind of like these middle-of-nowhere sort of non-places through the windshield, So there was something about that kind of, that element of, like, seeing places, but not only seeing places, like seeing them from this kind of interior, like sort of like specific subjective place of the car too, that I thought was kind of interesting and mirrors like I think the way that we live our lives here in this region.
Yeah, well, because you're saying, I mean, there's so many things that you're touching on that I think really resonate, like with me personally, and then also just with the greater, like the collective experience. I think that's why this piece really speaks to a lot of different people.
Mm-hmm.
You're mentioning a lot, like you're talking about this sort of, there's a certain anonymity to the road, but then you've taken it and created this incredibly personal, like what is your why? Like, why are you in this car for an hour and a half? And I will say an hour and a half is a long drive.
Yeah.
Like, and people joke about, there's that joke about LA, like, oh, it's true love if you pick someone up at LAX, right? Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
like, right? And I mean, that's
Or like if you live in the West Side and your partner lives in like Silver Lake or something, this like might as well be a long distance relationship.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, my grandfather had this term about people being GU, like geographically undesirable.
That's good. I'm going to use that.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
But I think that you're describing, yeah, this sort of like everyone's in their car doing their thing, and it turns into this collective just mush of cars. But there is something really personal about each car, and that's where your soundtrack, I think, really dials into that. I'm saying soundtrack because that's, I guess, like a movie term, but it's actually the musical composition that
Right.
is the other half of this film.
Yeah.
And a lot of those sounds are really close mic'd, very small sounds, sort of almost tiptoeing into the ASMR world
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the miking, not in terms of the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, to me, is, I love that kind of duality that's happening where you're just in a car. You could be any car. You could be going anywhere. But then also these like crispy little, very closely mic'd sounds or stones or like a vibraphone tone. So were you thinking of those kinds of things, or how, because you did the music separate from the video,
Mm-hmm.
clearly, because like spoiler alert, we did not have a marimba. I was sorry, a vibraphone in my car as we were driving.
Yeah.
But yeah, how were you kind of connecting those two ideas?
Yeah. Although I'm sure if I asked for putting a vibraphone in your car, I'm sure you would have been down.
I probably would have.
Yeah. Yeah. So the sounds, I'm a percussionist, first and foremost, right? So I think of, I feel like I tend to think of sounds in terms of, like really kind of specific granular sounds, right? So, which I feel like is maybe different than the way that other instrumentalists maybe think of like sound materials, so I'm not really so much interested in the sound of a vibraphone as much as I am interested in like the sound of like the hairs of the bow, like gliding on the vibraphone, or, like a specific stone, like rubbing on a specific snare drum tuned to a specific pitch, or things like that, right? Like things that are like really like hyper specific and subjective and granular. So for this piece, I was really thinking about just like the kind of raw materials that you're confronted with visually surrounding you, like when you're driving, like interfacing with the freeway system. So I was thinking about like, metal of other cars and buildings, like cement and stone for like, like highway medians and the ground and things like that, and brush and grass and plants for when you're in like a more chaparral sort of landscape, um, things like that. So I was thinking about like kind of raw materials, and just like really like trying to sort of have that be the kind of sound world as a method of kind of grounding the piece a little bit, because um, because like you said, it can be read as like such an anonymous thing, and it's a film that like comes from a personal place, but I don't think necessarily that you watch it and like get a sort of really subjective kind of interior sense, maybe necessarily. Um, so I think that was the interest in the sounds, as opposed to like having it be more realistic, like sounds of the radio or something like that that you would actually. I wanted it to be like a little bit more interior and cerebral. Just because like the experience of driving, like I said, can be so like hypnotic and kind of take your mind to like sort of other places, right? Like I thought of the sound as like a way of grounding the experience and like bringing it back to like what are you actually observing around you, and like what are you looking at, and what is like the material environmental makeup of like these places that you're sort of moving through.
Yeah, well, that definitely comes across because there are, like you say, there's this sort of some kind of connective tissue with all the
Yeah.
sounds. It doesn't feel like it's pulling you out of left field. But I definitely, like another part of it that I was really interested in was the fact that, like, when you and I did the shoot day, you were the director, and I was like following where you had said to go, and we were kind of driving like crazy people. Like we didn't have a destination
Yeah.
other than to capture this footage. And then when you put it together, you really chose kind of a shot list, not a shot list, but an order that you edited it and compiled it in that's completely nonsensical, which
Yeah.
is, I think, really important because it's, if you're not familiar with the area, then you have no way of tracking it like
Yeah.
at all. But if you are familiar with the area, it forces you to just be in that shot in that moment. You're like, oh, now
Yeah.
we're here. It was almost acting like these sort of long postcards that are not, it's not like, oh, we're going from the beach to inland, or we're going from north to south, or even the time of day. It wasn't like, oh, we're tracking through golden hour or something.
Right.
So I'm just curious if you were like, yeah, what were you considering as you chose which um, shot to choose, just the visual part?
Yeah, I think like I'm just really disinterested in like narrative as a form right now, and I think that's true in my music too. Um, I think in general, I don't know what this says about me, but I'm just like sort of I'm gravitated towards like fragmented kind of like sort of segments of material that are not necessarily sort of linked by any like narrative or linear logic. I think, the way that you said it is astute. Like, just because it kind of places you in like the raw experience of each piece, as opposed to trying to discern some sort of like coherent structure from beginning to end. And I think that narrative sometimes is emergent, right? Like I think there is still like a kind of beginning, middle, and end to this piece, but not in a way, like you said, like we're not going from one destination to another, or we're not really going from like one affective place to another one, at least like not in like a clear way. So yeah, I had another part of that I was gonna say, but yeah, I think there was just to like trying to resist the sort of um, tendency of resolving something, or the feeling of like getting somewhere, because there was another big inspiration for this piece was this book called The City Observed by, I think he's an anthropologist, Charles Moore, and it's basically just like a sort of field guide to a lot of Los Angeles's like architecture and
Cool.
places. But he describes everything not as like as a destination, but as like a sort of place that you pass like on a ride, right? Like he
Hmm.
says that we sort of experience this region not as a series of discrete places that we arrive at, but places that we observe like on the ride um, because of like motorist culture and automobiles and the freeway systems and things like that. So I think that was kind of what I was trying to get at with rearranging the shots in that way, is just this idea that so much of our like imaginary of this place that we live in is conceived through like sort of fleeting passing images, as opposed to I'm going to this place in like a logical way.
Yeah, yeah. That's like as you're talking about this stuff, I'm realizing that I feel this kind of friction when people say like, "Oh, you live in Southern California, the traffic's terrible," or whatever, and my instant gut reaction is like, "It's not that bad," or if you structure your life differently, it's not like that, or
Right.
it's sort of
Yeah.
like, and
Trying
you
to
even,
justify it.
yeah, and you're even saying like, "Oh, well, it wasn't that long of a drive; it was an hour and a half or something," right? Um, and I'm wondering why we, as people who've chosen to live in Southern California, why we push up against that so hard. Like why we're not able to say like, yeah, we drive for a long time and we do awesome stuff. Like
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
that's a
Like
good question. Yeah.
it's
I think maybe like, well, I suppose like the cynical outlook is we should just like try to demand a better like a quality of living for ourselves and stop like accepting these things as reality.
mhm, mhm.
But and part of it is like that is the reality of living here, and maybe it's like a better use of one's time and energy um to just kind of like examine the effects of that, as opposed to trying to cast this like some sort of like, I don't know, ethical judgment on it or something, right? Because I don't think any one of us is going to change either legislatively or environmentally like the reality of like how many people drive and how bad the traffic is, right? Like we can't do anything about that right now.
Mhm.
um, Maybe an optimist would argue with me about that, but I don't know. It's just like it's a unique feature of this place, and I think it's just my impulse as like as an artist is to just like kind of like ask the question of like what does that mean for us? Like what are the sort of effects of that? And the
Yeah, well
effects are
that is the
like
job of an artist,
right,
is to
yeah,
like look at what we're going through and sort of show it to people and
yeah,
let them do with that what they will, kind of reflecting ourselves back at ourselves, and
yeah,
we're processing the world like as observers of art through what an artist is saying. And that's kind of like that's why I was really interested in your piece, and you mocked up like a really great sample, like since we just launched the call online, anyone else listening, just a
yeah. Do a
Frankenstein
sample
version.
video.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it was really illustrative of what you were going for, and it wasn't as personal. Like your final video is much, much better, but it's just this. It was just like, oh, this is what they're getting at. They're getting at this idea of um, treating the commute as raw materials for
Hmm.
your piece, which is kind of how you make your music as well.
Hmm.
It's like you're collecting these raw materials and then you're editing them together in a final version. I mean, it's sort of like how you put together a pop song, really, right? Like you're laying down one
Yeah.
track and then another, as opposed to like there's no like Matt LeVeque live realization of this music piece for Cloverleaf Interchange, unless you
No.
brought like six friends or something,
Right.
or had
Yeah.
to like reorchestrate it. And so it really feels like the video is another like layer that you've incorporated.
Yeah.
And I kind of wondering musically, because when I'm thinking about, because I compose in like a similar kind of world to you, I'm often thinking about like, yeah, like is there a pitch in this? Is this only non-pitched sounds? Is this kind of a gritty sound? Is someone in charge of a drone throughout? And I tend to have some kind of through line at some point that can easily be turned off, and then it can really change the person's perspective.
Mm,
And in this way, I felt like you were, in a great way, outsourcing the audio drone to the visual of the car, which really
mm,
allowed you to focus on just one sound.
mm.
And then sometimes you had like audio drones as well, but I'm wondering, did you feel like you were able to do that, or is that just like me noticing things that you didn't mean for me to notice?
No, that's a good question. I don't think I've thought much about that. But I think, yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in what you're saying. I feel like I used the video in this piece um, just as a kind of like another, yeah, like you said, like another sort of material layer on top of like the sounds that were there, you know.
Hmm.
Um, and I think the music in this film was interesting. I've never like it, I've never done this before. Like I took a lot of raw recordings of percussion sounds that I made, um, and then I like put them all, or I put a lot of them through samplers and like repitched a lot of them and made these like kind of chorale textures with like oftentimes like only one sample each for like several minutes, you know. Um, so I think the film opens with like a sound of I think a stone being rubbed on a ceramic tile, you know, classic experimental music sound, right?
Yeah.
Um, but then I repitched it like up a major third and like down a fifth or something. So then there's all it sounds like there's a lot of them, but it's really just like the same sample like layered on top of itself, you know. So I feel like I was thinking about drones kind of that way too. But I think you're right in that the video does kind of the video and like the sort of underlying sample of traffic, which I use basically through the whole film too, like at a really really low level. Um, I think that does kind of like sort of provide this like base for the composition if we think of like the film as a composition. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I have to think more about that.
Yeah, well, it just was, I felt like it was providing this like through line. It gives people something to hang on to.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then you can stretch like people's attention or stretch their ability to focus. And I find that like really helpful in my own work. And then I was like seeing it in yours, and I was like, oh man, this is really effective. Like it's
Yeah.
really working.
Yeah. That's interesting because, like I feel like the kind of forms I'm interested in I think in both music and film are just like really kind of cut and dry. I don't love like gradual transitions between things. I just kind of like to sort of sequence things and have them be what they are, right? Like you're sort of in one sort of static state for a while, and then you just like kind of move on to the next one. But I don't love the feeling of like that being like really kind of shocking or disorienting. That's not really like an affective thing that I'm interested in, at least right now. That could change. So yeah, like I hear what you're saying about like the through line, like giving some people like a kind of anchor to hold on to like when you're experiencing it, so that you don't get kind of thrown off by all these like sort of hard changes, and that also kind of lets you or like gives you the permission and space to like really focus in on like vertically what are the things that you're experiencing, as opposed to trying to like discern like a horizontal logic like I was talking about earlier.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first edit that you sent, it's like this beautiful film that we're watching, and then it just like ended, and I gasped out loud. Like I was almost like, oh, "How dare you!" Like take it
Yeah.
away. And I realized, like, oh my gosh, I was like really connected to like those sounds in a way that I hadn't put together until that moment. And
Yeah.
then I was actually like, and then I was chatting with Jen, and we're figuring out just like boring stuff like size of font or something. And I was like, that was like the Thelma and Louise of experimental music, like where I was just like driven off a cliff,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, so that's what I realized. And it was great to have that version of it, because I realized like, and like you say, that was not what you were looking for. You don't want people to be pulled out of the experience or
Right.
thrown off a cliff. And so you came up with a great ending.
Yeah.
But that's when I realized like just how compelling the whole thing had been. that I was like watching the whole thing, and then when it ended, I felt like I had been like robbed or something.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
it was useful to have that feedback too, because like when you're working on, I'm sure you know this just as well as anybody, like when you're working on something that you live in yourself for so long, and you're not really showing it to a lot of people, and you're working on it kind of for a long time, I feel like there's a danger of like kind of like becoming like immune to the sort of like, maybe like emotional effects of it, so I just thought like, yeah, it's a shot and then it's another shot and then it ends, no big deal, right? But to hear you guys say that was helpful, because it made me sort of kind of remember what the point was, or what one of the points was, and in the way that you can get kind of like sucked in, um, to this experience of like, staring at the road for so long, right? And that was, maybe just remember that was like kind of the point.
Yeah, yeah. No,
So
I mean,
yeah,
it's a great solution, and that's why we have edits and versions and all the rest of it.
yeah,
But it was
yeah,
also just really helpful to be like, oh man, I guess I was really into this.
right,
But I
yeah,
mean, but we have had that experience, like where you get home and you're in the driveway and you're like, I don't know who drove this car here. Like,
right,
it wasn't
yeah,
me.
yeah,
And so, but this was a different ending because I wasn't, well, I mean, I was driving, but let's not get into the weeds with that.
yeah, yeah. That's a secret.
No, I think it was important that you have someone drive so that you could direct, because that is the
Yes,
job of what you were up to.
yes.
I'm
Thank you,
kind
thank you for driving me around town for 6 hours.
of, I would say anytime, but I do not mean that.
Yeah, no, of course not.
I'm curious, like, if you're willing to share, like, kind of the after, because you made this movie a little bit ago, like, what are you sort of interested in now? Like, do you have a project on the horizon that you're looking forward to, or that some kind of materials that or ideas you're working with?
Yeah, I think this film kind of like opened the floodgates for me a little bit in like a really cool way. I think it made me realize that, well, one, I think there's more to do with this kind of material visually.
Hmm.
I think I'm just really interested. Well, I always have been, but um, I just really love like the California landscape, and environments, and it's I've lived here my whole life, so I just like I feel a strong attachment to it, and I'm just like really I'm interested in like exploring that visually a little bit more, um, because there's so many kinds of landscapes that we interface with between, like urban ones, or the desert or the beach, or if you go up north, like more greenery and forests and things like that, or like in like Central California, like completely nothing,
Yeah.
things like that. So I'm imagining at some point there's a kind of longer, more durational, like uh, maybe sequel to this piece, or some sort of version of it. And I don't know if it like is just driving footage or if there's static shots too. Um, but I really just like kind of want to take this idea further, this like sort of element of like queer placemaking in commutes or commuting, and like California freeway systems and things like that. So that's one idea.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, that's a
um,
lot of like really rich material in there. And I think we all, not we all, but I mean, I know for me, I lived in California for a long time before I had that whole like heart exploding love for California
yeah,
as a geographic place, because of the fact that we can access everything you've just said in like a short drive. Also, the duration of short grows
yes,
once you live here to include like 6 hour drives, you know what I'm
yeah,
saying? And
that's
so,
not bad. Yeah,
right, yeah, I mean, well, I just drove from Canada like this week. And so, yeah, everything you're saying about the tippy top of California to where we are right now, you go through all of those things. And I didn't even take the pretty road. Like, there's
right.
a lot to explore there.
Yeah,
And it's also neat. What I'm hearing you say is that you're starting to see a visual part to what you're up to. Like that
yeah.
there might be some kind of video incorporated into your work, which is something you hadn't been doing a little as much earlier.
Yeah, yeah. It's new for me, but I feel like, yeah, I feel like I'm interested in kind of chasing this a little bit more, you know. And it's funny, I'm kind of getting like gear acquisition syndrome now too. I'm like, man, this would look really good if I like got a 16 millimeter camera and like,
Yes.
you
Yes.
know, like spent thousands of dollars developing film and, you know, and stuff like that. So I'm going down that rabbit hole a little bit,
Yeah.
but,
Well,
yeah,
if you're yeah.
I'm really enticed by video right now.
Yeah, and I think that in our community, there's a lot of like sharing and sourcing of materials and stuff like that. I
Yeah.
mean, that's pretty much like one of the things we're offering with Music for Inbox. You know, I mean, right, literally in the garage where I'm sitting, we're shooting another video, and there's a lot of equipment sharing and things like that. Because you're totally right. You're like, oh, if I were just, you know, this bit, this bit, this bit, like having
Yeah.
the extra components can really help it along. But luckily, there's a lot of people living here who have those things to lend you
Yeah. Yeah.
before you go completely bankrupt.
Yes. Yeah, so there's that. And then I think like just the idea of like sort of repitching and sampling like percussion recordings is also interesting to me right now. So yeah, I'm sort of asking myself the question is of like if there's like a record of that kind of material like in the near future. Just as a way of kind of accessing more like ambient-esque sounds than I've done in the past, you know, just like thinking about music like as a combination of like acoustic and electronic sources, you know. I'm finding that
Yeah,
really interesting and kind of new right now.
yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I look forward to the record or the 6-hour durational film,
Yeah.
whichever comes first.
Yeah. Yeah,
um,
I'll need a new hard drive for that for sure.
at least one.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for chatting with me today. Folks can still see your film for the next few days. We're going to be selling tickets off of our website, and it comes with a beautiful postcard by Yumiko Glover. And so, yeah, I guess it'll be up till the 31st, and then people have to dig through the gift shop to find it, but still there. And then we'll have it screened live sometime in the fall or in the spring of 2026. Thanks so
Great.
much, Matt.
Thanks, Cassia. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll see you around.
Yeah. Have a good day.
Okay, thanks.